Good morning, quilt people and seekers of the world. How are you? I'm doing really well. Happy to be back. Excited about today's topic. Outcomes. Drama. It's an interesting topic because do you remember a few videos back we were looking at like where we are in time and space and how to fill our minds with things that bring us joy rather than cause us stress and anxiety? And how we originally were looking at that. Remember, I used this envelope and I said that this is the present moment, right? And that when we are in the present moment, we are unwounded from the past and unwoundable, right? And that's the place we're trying to get to. And that this, in the current moment, that we could look back here and that we could look at all the things that went wrong and all the things that our ego wants to have an opinion about. And very much that is where we see lack. That is where we see lovelessness. And so we kind of close the door on the past and say, okay, that's not really a safe place to hang out. So then, let's look to the future, remember? And we were we're looking into the future and we're excited about what's coming up. And we're, using that process to manifest, to call into action, into being what our will is driving. However, turns out that the future is also sometimes fraught with trouble, right? And while I think the future is a better place to have your mind hang out than in the past, right? Because the past will always show you lack. It will always show you lovelessness because it's also showing you the spectrum of, just experience. So when we look to the future, I think we have a better opportunity for possibility, right? Anything that lives in possibility lives in spirit. Spirit always is abundant, fluid, open, right? Whereas ego is always contracted and closed, not open to new information, not fluid, right? All of those types of things. So when we're looking to the future, we can also mess ourselves up by having a few things that live there in the future that aren't in the present. In the future can lie all kinds of stress, right? You could remember how we were talking about not using our imagination to co-opt our ego and examine the things in the past. Well, you also shouldn't allow your ego to co-opt your imagination to worry about things that have yet to happen. Okay? So that's the first obvious, moment to look at something to be mindful of, something to be careful of when you are living in the future, that you're not also setting yourself up for stress, right? That you're not having expectations on what's going to happen. The other thing that we have to let go of that lives in the future is outcomes. I have had a really good example of that in the way that our imagination tethered to the future will also cause us pain in the way that our, imagination tethered to the past can do the same. In the future, let's just take the really simple, low-hanging fruit example of my books. When I published my books, I clearly had some level of expectation, some level of an outcome that was desired, that was needed in order for me to be, fulfilled and whole as a human. And so when that didn't happen, when literally none of my friends showed any interest in, my books, I clearly was holding on to an outcome. And then when that outcome wasn't met, I experienced massive pain. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't a reasonable expectation that those who are your support system will support you. Right? There is that, but there's also the understanding of when we experience pain or anger, that's the intelligence of the universe alerting us to where our personal boundaries are. I clearly had a personal boundary over the fact that I really needed some people to show up for me. And when that didn't happen, when that outcome, right, that I held an expectation around wasn't met, I experienced pain. That pain is optional. You're like, how? Because because this is the crazy thing about where I am in the work right now. Where I am in the work right now is that I continue to fight to be present to the moment, right? To not allow my imagination to be tethered to the past, but also be mindful that when I'm tethering my imagination to the future, and even though I'm calling into being, right, what I want to manifest, and that's all good, that there are ways that I can trip myself up in the future. So I'll be mindful of that, not to live there and allow my ego to harm myself by living in the future. Oh, all right, I got it. So when we're trying to fix pain, where we get off is we keep trying to elevate where we are in the ego, right? So if we're looking at layers of evolution, and the first one being the ego, which is where the majority of humans live on this planet, right? They live in the ego. They live in the fight. They live in a situation that holds someone else as the bad guy. That there is another team on the other side that you have to beat. That there has to be a victor. That whole bandwidth of thinking and experiencing the world has to shift. There's no better way to try and experience the world from behind the ego. And so we keep trying to fix, our unhappiness in the world of unhappiness, right? And it's just not possible. Anything that you do from behind the lens of the ego will cause you pain. That's its function. And it doesn't mean to, it's just, showing you all the information. And some of that information, like lovelessness and lack and crazy, feels really painful to us. You can't evolve while looking at life from behind the lens of the ego. If you're the good guy and there's somebody else who's the bad guy, ever, whether it be your political affiliation, whether it be your religion, whether it be wherever you show up in life, if there's a bad guy, you're functioning from behind the lens of the ego. You will never find happiness there. You cannot evolve a better way to be right. You can't evolve a better way to be wrong. Anything that lives in the duality of good and bad and right and wrong, including your religion, is from behind the lens of the ego, and it is therefore by default man-made, not God-made. The God in the Bible murders personally over 370,000 individuals. The God in the Bible also commands the execution of an additional 1 million+ people in the Bible. If we have any kind of understanding of God, and that God is love, and that God creates all of this, right, to live in abundance, to live in love, and yet your religion is telling you that God kills and murders, that God is jealous and angry, these are human traits. These are not traits available to God. When we evolve, when we get out of the bandwidth, the density of duality and the ego of me versus them and right versus wrong, you have to transcend that entire experience, that entire bandwidth. There is no happiness there. When you get out of the ego, and there's no bad guy, and that everybody is doing the best that they can, and that everybody is on the same path, headed for the same place. When you abandon duality and adopt the unity of the heart, that's when things can start to get good for you. But they can't get good for you while you're still fighting. I know, it's so counterintuitive, right? But to win the war, we have to drop our weapons. All of our weapons. You cannot live life with a bad guy and you as the good guy and expect to be happy. There's no happiness there. You have to transcend that entire mental bandwidth, that entire mental construct that man has set up. God didn't set that up. No, God is not capable of judgment. It's like we were talking about so many times before. I got it. God doesn't offer forgiveness. The entire concept of forgiveness is of the ego because forgiveness requires that there be sin. There is no sin. Sin doesn't exist. Sin is not something that God stands behind. God will never forgive you because he's never judged you. There's nothing to forgive. Does that start to feel a lot more like love? There is nothing to forgive. You are perfect. You have been perfect. Your entire life, you have been perfect and you have never made a mistake. That's the way God sees you. He's not judging you, right? He's encouraging you. He's on Team Dale, right? He's on your side and conspiring for your highest and best. So whether there's any of this ego stuff related around the concept of God, that's all man-made. All man-made. The Bible, the judgment, the killing of 1 million plus people. That's not God. That's free will of man run amok. So where am I with all of this whole thing, right? Because I keep coming back to, like, my biggest fight, my mountain to climb is getting right with faith communities that are openly bigoted against gay people. That's always going to be the most triggering for me because it's always been where I have experienced the most judgment and crazy, right, in my life. That's just where it's lived. So where am I with that? If we're looking at this in the same thought pattern as we have before, I can't experience being right or wrong with faith communities, can I? I have to transcend that. I have to transcend that to the point, like, there is no more judgment, where to the point where I no longer have access to fear or complaint over that community. Ooh. And I haven't fully started climbing that mountain of eliminating self-judgment, right? Part 1 was eliminating judgment on the world and getting seated in self and knowing that I am here and everything else is out there and that's not me. I'm here. I am only here. And I only have one fight, which isn't out there. Nowhere out there, not even in any faith community, does my fight live. My fight lives up here. So when I see faith communities, it's not holding a judgment on them, right? I can't do that anymore and expect to be happy because that will just make me crazy, clearly. Right? I can't hold a judgment on them. I have to transcend the world of judgment to find myself seated in my own soul. Seated in self, without access to fear or complaint, to transcend judgment and only inhabit love. So if I look at faith communities and they're all doing it wrong and they're all like, there's no happiness there for me. There is no happiness. And I have to give up being right, and I have to give up being wrong, and I have to give up holding a judgment on anything. Ultimately, that's where we get off. We judge God's plan, God's world, God's experience of creating all of this. And we sit there and look at God's plan and go, yeah, not quite right. Right? That's the way, like, we look at it, like the intelligence of the universe creating all of this, and we hold judgment on that, and that's ultimately what causes us pain. We have to, again, transcend our minds out of the place that holds judgment on God's plan. We do not get to have an opinion on that, ever, 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 ever. And now you're going to be seeing, like, well, how does that move us forward? How does transcending judgment on an individual basis, how does that get us there? How do we win by dropping our weapons? And that's the whole reason I wrote the Language and Light series. Those books really are an exploration of how to win a war without fighting. I have to drop my weapons if I ever expect to be happy. I have to drop my weapons if I ever expect to align with the vibe of Gaia and Earth. I have to drop my weapons if I ever want to win the war. The war will be won when enough people just stop fighting and allow their space to be where everybody wins, where everybody's entitled to living their best life, where they are allowed to experience themselves as required by them and their creator, and not for me to hold the judgment on that. Now, that doesn't mean that you let people abuse you or attack you, right? That's never okay. But at the same time, where there is not love, that's our job. That's our only job, is to bring love to loveless situations. Because if I'm not bringing it, and they're not bringing it, it holds no chance. It holds no chance for things to evolve, and for that person who's maybe, that I think is acting completely insane, to learn and evolve, because if I'm attacking them, they will not have that opportunity. Getting to that place of dropping your weapons and becoming, unwoundable. That's the part that I'm still, like, the unwounded from the past, yeah, that's easy to get, right? But unwoundable, like literally unwoundable in the present moment, a lot of that also stems from the separation of me versus you, right? That getting centered in self that it requires. I'm constantly amazed at how much this work requires you to be centered in self/self-centered. Make it about you. You're the only game in town that you can actually affect change and make things better with, right? You going out and trying to change the world is an exercise in futility. Not that you can't help things move along and whatever. You can. But ultimately, what we're trying to get to is an evolution of consciousness. And that requires us each individually to do our part to end the crazy, to end the fight, to just take a breath and allow the world to experience itself as it wants to, without us needing to get involved and getting crazy and getting in there and fighting and fighting and fighting and more fighting. If you are fighting, you are not evolved. Period. Right? To fight anything is to fight your own alignment. And that's ultimately where it all lives. Your alignment. That peace within yourself. That sense of still water, right? Your entire being is just that sense of still water, and you want to always maintain that level of still within yourself, right? Because if you start fighting and start injecting yourself with frustration and anger and all, that's not smooth water. Well, that's crazy. So it's in that knowing that that's where the solution lives. And trust me, I don't have all the answers yet, and I'm still really in a place of not being in flow. I'm still, it's like the information's kind of trickling in, whereas other times it's just like a waterfall. I'm like, too much. Which is fine. I find that this experience for me ebbs and flows very much, and I have learned to just go with it. And when I am receiving a lot of more information, that's when I'm writing books and doing all that. And when I'm not, I'm just kind of resting and knowing that it'll come back. But it's also staying in not only curiosity, but inspiration. For me, that's where so much of this all lives for me. What we're ultimately trying to get to is a place where we all win. Doesn't matter what side of the political aisle or anything that you're on. I want you to win. I want you to win, I want me to win, and we all win and we're all happy, right? Like, there is a world where that can exist, right? So ultimately, that's, I think, where we're trying to get to. I just wanted to, come in here and also get on this channel the future problems that I have seen over the last week with myself, and I'm just kind of like, this is fine, oh, that's not fine. Clarify what that is. Anyways, like I said, I wanted to do this, even though I'm not completely in flow right now, just to kind of, help you along, maybe think about some things as we continue on into the future. Anyways, that's where we are today. I hope that you're doing well, and I will see you next time. All right, bye.